Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the World Cup of Pokémon VGC, hosted, in fact, by Victory Road, sponsored by Elgato, GG Tour, and, of course, Metafy. My name's Ben Kiriakou, joined here by Mavorok, who is on this side. No, on this side. Got it wrong. I got it right the first time round. Didn't get it quite right the second time round, but Maeve, we've had two really exciting matches so far. We're going into the third of four matches that is going on today, and we've got a really exciting one to play against, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. And I know you're this way, so I'll get that right first try. That's just I had a lot more time to think about it. Let's be clear. However, like you said, this match is, I think, one of my probably the one that I've been most excited for today, and that is between Lazaropoulos and Gabriel Agati. So Gabriel, like I just saw at the North American International Championships, had an incredibly strong finish and placed second. And he is somebody who is incredibly talented. We've seen him do incredibly well in tournaments for years now, really. Such a strong player. And then we also get to see the Lazaropoulos, who has done really well, third in player rankings in Latin America currently. Also somebody who is on Team Greece, which for you and I in between calls here, we get to poke fun a little bit at our co-caster Costa. So, that for us, I think, is always part of the joy of it.
Absolutely. And Greece is one of those communities that's really been strong. And before we make fun of Costa, we will have to, give him a little bit of credit. Costa has really helped grow the Greek community fantastically. They have an excellent player base, and it's nice to see, especially coming back to events in Europe this year, to live events. We've seen some of the Greeks have really solid performances here, so I definitely don't count them out. Gabriel is a fantastic player and has had those deep runs, those big event finishes, of course, like you mentioned, Maeve. But the Greeks are nothing to shake a stick at there, as we see the standings currently. Brazil 2, Greece 2.
Absolutely. This is a tie currently between these two. Both of them are fishing for what would be a really important win out of this match between Gabriel and Lazaros. So it's really, of course, very interesting to see how these teams, a lot of them are using very standard stuff. However, I am seeing a Lugia in there with a Metagross. So that's one that I think immediately catches my eye. Costa using a Talonflame in his team, which is an interesting choice that we actually saw a little bit on last week's streams on Sunday, I believe. But it's a really tough thing because you want to be able to win, you want to break that tie, you want to give your team that momentum heading into the last 5 games of this week.
Yeah, exactly. And before we move on to seeing how this match is going to be playing out, do have one shout out. So that Lugia coming out from Team Greece, getting a 2-0 victory against Brazil, alongside a Metagross as well. Really a shame that we didn't get to cast that match, but just showing the strength of the Greek team building and making it work for a particular matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely making it work. Costa, of course, is one of those players that did get 2-0'd. Which is very unfortunate. We did say that we would talk about it, and I can't chicken out here. So, but either way, if we do kind of want to move forward a little bit, looking at from both of these teams, going back towards really what the two players that we're going to be facing, again, both of those players are so strong. So anybody who has to go up against Gabriel Agati, you have to be on your A game, as you do with, of course, every game in World Cup, but you do have to really focus on finding a way to take down what Gabriel is going to be playing. But there is a lot of information on what he's been running this season. Of course, that North American International finalist this year, World Championships top 8 and top 16 in the Oceania International Championships, both in 2019, Latin America Internationals top 4 in 2016. Lazaros was part of the World Cup last year. He did do an incredibly good job. He's somebody who has kind of been part of that Greek team. I believe we were able to watch some of his games last season as well during that qualifier stage. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. But Lazaros has way more information on what Gabriel likes to play, what he likes to run, what he's been using this season than Gabriel has on Lazaros.
Exactly. And this is one of the sort of decision-making processes that you have to make in these sort of team tournament environments. is, the favorite player, so to speak, is certainly on paper would be Gabriel. He's going to be wanting to use something solid and consistent. You see there the Zacian Kyogre core, which is one of the more consistent pairings that we've seen, paired with that Tornadus, Kartana, Landorus, and Mimikyu, which is a little bit different from what we usually see. But Lazaros, I think, if you want to get the win against one of these stronger players, you really have to push the boat out and try to come up with something that has a good matchup. Just make sure that you have what it takes to put yourself on the front foot. And that Calyrex Ice Rider Palkia, with a little bit of a change here, bringing that Tapu Koko in, where usually there would be a Tapu Fini, doing a similar job to Tapu Fini by stopping sleep, but actually maybe giving a little bit more sort of pivoting options, and it's certainly in this matchup able to knock out a Kyogre pretty handily, I'm sure, with the right environment. Could be quite an interesting matchup for this particular set of Pokemon.
Yeah, and Gabriel used a team that, if not exactly the same, was incredibly similar for North American internets. And we saw how important that Landorus was on that team, along with that Kartana. Both of those Pokemon were Pokemon that he did choose to Dynamax during those games. And you saw exactly how good his Kartana build was, because it was able to, sustain a lot of heavy hits that you don't always think of when you think of Kartana, because one wrong move from a fire type Pokemon and it's gone. It was like it wasn't in the game. So you really only have to worry about contending possibly with the Incineroar or maybe a Flamethrower from the Palkia here. So that's something that I think Gabriel's going to have to kind of be careful to play around with. But he does have a pretty good answer with that Kartana. It can go for something into that Porygon too. It can put on a lot of pressure onto the Tapu Koko as well. However, we will be seeing the Mimikyu Kyogre lead and the Incineroar Palkia leads here from both of these Pokemon.
Yeah, and so this is quite interesting, because both the Palkia and the Mimikyu can go for Trick Room if they want to. Of course, you have the Fake Out pressure, which is only going to affect Kyogre on Gabriel's side of the field, and Kyogre can realistically stop that from being a problem by just going for the max and knocking out the Incineroar on this turn. That may help Lazaros get a little bit of positive momentum here, so Gabriel's going to have to be a little bit careful about what Pokemon he knocks out at what times of the game, because we've seen in the first match of this broadcast today that knocking out a Pokemon may not actually give you the positive momentum swing that you want. Of course, as well, there is that Fairy typing on Mimikyu on Gabriel's side of the field, so if Gabriel wants to, he can just launch out some damage into the Palkia and just start taking it down. That'll make it easier in the end game for Kyogre to bring the damage that it wants to bring against that Palkia into play, and maybe that'll make an impact like 4 or 5 turns down the line.
Yeah, there is going to be a Dynamax from Lazaros here. It's going to be that Palkia, so there is no Trick Room coming from his side of the field, because that Palkia is instead going to be putting out damage as it would like to do so in the beginning of this game, trying to maybe mitigate whatever could come out from Gabriel's side. Mimikyu goes for that Play Rough, though, using that Fairy typing, doing super effective damage onto the Palkia here, but also showing it has a Life Orb as an item. Water Spout brings the Incineroar down to its Focus Sash, which is a build we've been seeing a lot more in the past few weeks onto this Incineroar. Does a little bit of damage onto the Palkia. Palkia goes for a Max Quake here, trying to boost the special defense of it and its partner Pokemon and take a ton of damage onto this Kyogre to prevent it from continuing to use that Water Spout. However, that Water Spout at this point, with the rain and with about over 50% of its HP, is going to be better than using that Origin Pulse as of yet. Incineroar choosing to go for a Parting Shot into that Kyogre slot as well, so that Mimikyu being left alone. So if it had wanted to go for a Trick Room, that would have still been a pretty good time for it. Don't know if I lost you there, Ben, but instead, no. Now Lazaros does have to have the option maybe of bringing in his Amoonguss here, possibly moving a little bit forward, having options for Sleep maybe, or another way to maybe bring in Trick Room with his Calyrex. A couple of different options kind of moving forward with his Pokemon here, especially now because he knows he's going to be losing that Incineroar. May want to have a way to cycle an Intimidate or a Fake Out onto some of the physical attackers onto Gabriel's team. Ben, are you back with me? Have you joined me again?
I have indeed joined you
there
again.
We go.
The internet decided to not play ball today, so yeah, seen a Palkia that looks like it did a little bit of damage to that Kyogre in turn 1.
Yeah, it did do about 50% of its HP with a max Quake there, getting a special defense boost and allowing that Kyogre to get down to under half of its HP, and the Kyogre also took a parting shot from an Incineroar that got brought down to its Focus Sash just to try and catch you up here. Mimikyu did not take any damage. Its damage is from its Life Orb, so Mimikyu in a pretty good position to maybe go for something like a Trick Room in the next turn, maybe to counteract a Trick Room from this Palkia, because that Disguise still has not been broken yet on it.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting position here, because the Lazaros' team is really trying to maybe get into Trick Room, and Gabriel's probably isn't. So I would expect that Mimikyu to be wanting to go a little bit more on the offensive, and certainly now that we're seeing a max from Gabriel, now that Gabriel knows that the Pokemon on Lazaros' side of the field have gone for their Dynamax. And it is going to be that Mimikyu, so we'll see if that max Starfall will be enough to pick up the knockout with the increased power onto that Palkia this turn.
Yeah, and that Mimikyu is running Life Orb, so this max Starfall is going to be able to do a ton of damage. We saw that it was able to do a pretty decent amount, even outside of a Dynamax. It does bring it down to the bottom 25% of its HP, and does set that Misty Terrain, which is really nice to see as well. Going to be able to possibly negate any sort of weird, funky sleep powder from that Amoonguss on the opposite side of the field. Origin Pulse from the Kyogre onto both of the Pokemon on Lazaros' side doesn't do a ton of damage, and a max Quake here onto this Kyogre once again does bring it down pretty much almost to getting knocked out. So Gabriel's going to have to focus maybe on whatever he has in the back, maybe trying to force this knockout here to allow himself to get better board position. Palkia taking even more damage from its Life Orb. Calyrex going for that Trick Room though, so it is going to be able to fire off some Glacial Lances right out of the gate, maybe get a knockout on this Kyogre and get that Chilling Neigh boost.
Yeah, almost, even though there's one turn left, I almost want to see Lazaros switching out that Palkia to bring in the Incineroar. The Glacial Lance is almost certainly going to be enough to knock out the Kyogre in this turn. And if that's the case, you break the Disguise on the Mimikyu, you get the Kyogre knocked out, you bring in the Incineroar to get that Intimidate onto the field, and, really start to take advantage of that Trick Room. But Gabriel going for the Protect and the Max Guard, not going to take any damage from that Glacial Lance.
Yeah, maybe just trying to time out that Trick Room here a little bit, help deal with some of these Dynamax moves and Dynamax turns. Max Guys are hitting into that Max Guard as well, so not going to be able to do any damage onto the Mimikyu either. And now the Dynamax ends for Palkia. Gabriel still has, I believe, one more turn, and a Max Starfall could be pretty huge here.
It could be. I think the thing that I'm looking at right now is that Calyrex on Lazaros' side of the field, because it is providing a lot of spread pressure, and the only Pokemon with Intimidate on Gabriel's side of the field is that Landorus. Well, you can't really switch a Landorus into a Calyrex very safely, but nor is it very easy to bring it against Palkia and Calyrex. So that Calyrex is going to be huge for this matchup, and just making sure that that Lazaros is doing as much damage as possible.
One Pokemon that does want to face down a Calyrex Ice Rider is a Zacian, able to go for something like a Behemoth Blade to do a ton of damage. Glacial Lance here does finally break that Disguise on the Mimikyu, who has just been sitting around pretty comfortably, and does a pretty small chunk of damage as well onto that Zacian. But most importantly, that Zacian switching in means that this Glacial Lance was not able to activate a Chilling Neigh. Hydro Pump into the Mimikyu is enough to knock it out here though, so if it was going to go for something like a Max Darkness, if it was carrying a move for that, not able to get that off this turn, and getting rid of a Pokemon that can be pretty pesky. Palkia, even though it got the knockout, does take its own Life Orb chip damage and is also knocked out here. So Lazaros, I think, in a little bit more of an interesting position, because even though he has Trick Room up and he could send in his Amoonguss right now, there is Misty Terrain on the field.
Yeah, Misty Terrain is pretty significant here, at least to be able to try to knock out that, or to stop that Zacian moving. But unfortunately for Lazaros, that Kartana coming in is really not what you want to see in this situation. Amoonguss' main job here, especially with the Misty Terrain up, is to get those redirects going with the Rage Powder. Maybe spend a little bit of time Pollen Puffing, as you can see there, as an option for Lazaros. Getting that HP back for the Calyrex, making sure it's in a good enough position to move. But even without Max available to Gabriel, nor Lazaros at this stage of the game, that Kartana is able to, attack irrespective of the Amoonguss on Lazaros' side of the field, even when this Misty Terrain runs out, it can't be put to sleep, and so it's sitting in a really nice position, especially with that 1 HP Incineroar in the back.
Yeah, Pollen Puff here, able to bring this Calyrex up to full HP, showing Amoonguss is the slowest thing on the field. High horsepower from the Calyrex into the Zacian is not enough to get the knockout here. Possibly with a Grim Chilling Neigh boost, it would have been able to. And a Behemoth Blade from this Zacian will be coming back right for the trouble of taking its own big hit here. Calyrex absolutely knocked out, a one-hit knockout from this Behemoth Blade. So this Calyrex is no longer able to put on that pressure, possibly was seeing if they would be baiting out a Rage Powder here, but Smart Strike from the Kartana into the Amoonguss does a pretty nice amount of damage, and the rain does finally end here. So bringing this Incineroar in means that this Incineroar, if it wants to go for a last chance Flare Blitz into this Zacian and leave Amoonguss on the field to kind of try and figure everything out, does mean that that will be at its normal strength.
Yeah, and you know, normally that would be good if you have Pokemon in the back and you know, you have Incineroar on maybe full health at this point. Yeah, it could be something that's you know, an end game that you may want to play, especially if you have that Dynamax available. One of my favorite things to watch players do is to max their Incineroar at full and just watch people go like, wait a second, I wanted to knock that out and now it doesn't get knocked out. But, you know, in this situation, Incineroar can't be protected by the Amoonguss. You do have Pollen Puff there, but it's unlikely that Incineroar is going to last long enough for that to happen. And if Pollen Puff is used by Amoonguss, then it's not Rage Powdering, which means that it's going to be knocked out. And so, yeah, really uphill battle, especially when the only damaging move that Incineroar has available to it does get that recoil.
Yeah, the Pollen Puff here, though, able to go first thanks to this last turn of Trick Room. Zacian did protect here. A Flare Blitz into the Kartana is enough to get that knockout. So now Kartana is off of the field, predicting that protect from the Zacian, maybe trying to see if that Kartana was not baiting anything. But now Trick Room is over, so now you cannot get this Pollen Puff off onto your Incineroar to heal it up right out of the gate and allow it to go maybe for another move.
Yeah, I kind of get the protect there from Gabriel, maybe a little bit safer than what you needed. I mean, if in this position, if you just go for attacks here, you're probably going to be in a fine board state. But understand that, you know, you want to make sure that Trick Room is gone from the field. You want to get that Kyogre in so that it's unopposed and able to do as much as possible. The tricky thing here is that the Amoonguss can go for a Spore. Unfortunately, Incineroar won't be able to take too much advantage of that because it isn't able to you know, protect itself while Amoonguss goes for a cheeky little Spore or something like that. But there is the option for Agati to go for something like an Origin Pulse. And if that Origin Pulse doesn't hit the Incineroar, it could be a way for Lazaros to get back into this match.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funky endgame here, right? Because you're looking at the Pokemon on the field and you're like, oh, well, there's two restricted against two Pokemon that are more support-based. So you can kind of assume that you may get luckier. Zacian going for the Behemoth Blade. There is no Rage Powder, interestingly enough, so they are going into that Amoonguss. Does do a pretty good chunk of damage, but it's not enough to get that knockout. Brings it down to 15 HP, and it is going to show that it is carrying a berry here, and that is a Citrus Berry for this Amoonguss, restoring some health. Origin Pulse, Incineroar avoids it, most importantly, which I think is the move that Lazaros needed here onto this. Amoonguss will take it and will get knocked out, so that Citrus Berry wasn't enough to hold it together. But this does kind of mean now that this Incineroar can go for the Flare Blitz onto this Zacian. It does not have much HP left, so even once it gets knocked out, you won't be taking a ton of recoil damage in return. And the only fully accurate move that this Kyogre has that could do damage is Ice Beam. So you may have to try and go for an Ice Beam into this Incineroar, or maybe go for an Origin Pulse and hope that it hits.
Yeah, I think Ice Beam is probably enough in this situation. It's really hard to say, but I didn't quite see it from the early game when my internet decided to die on me, but was that the Focus Sash on the Incineroar?
It was the Focus Sash on the Incineroar, you are correct.
Yeah.
So that which has been popping up a lot recently.
Yeah, and if it's Focus Sash on the Incineroar, usually they're built to be less defensive, and so probably in that board state, you'd think that the Ice Beam would be enough to pick up the KO. I mean, even at low health, when you've got Rain going up, maybe Water Spout is enough. With the single target going on here from the Kyogre, I wouldn't be surprised. You really want to try to not click the Origin Pulse button, right? Because that's the only way that this game goes badly for you.
Yeah, Water Spout connects, and it is enough to get that knockout. It did look pretty close. The damage was going down a little too slow for my liking, I think, here. So that does mean that is a win for Gabriel, and a really interesting, tough end game. One where those players really had to think, several moves ahead, because it's one of those playing to your out situations where your out is incredibly convoluted, and even though you have to get there, you have to do the mental math, the mental Tetris almost, to put yourself in those positions. So I think it was really well played by Lazaros, going for exactly the way that he knew he needed to win, even if that way was incredibly confusing and, again, convoluted, I think is the word.
Yeah, but it found a line that actually could work, and you've got to give Lazaros props for that, absolutely. Gabriel just playing quite safely, quite conservatively. I do think that, in that end game, Gabriel maybe missed an opportunity to just go for the attack, make sure that Incineroar was knocked out, make sure that Pollen Puff wasn't quite as effective as it was. But, it still worked out for a win for Gabriel, and he knew exactly what he was doing. So, really well played from both players. I really want to shout out that Dynamax on the Mimikyu there as well. Did so much work in the early game, made it so that Gabriel got into that position early to be putting on the pressure, making sure that Palkia went down, making sure that when Kyogre came back in, it could use that really quite weak Water Spout to finish the game. And, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Planning for your turns well in advance, especially when you're up against Trick Room.
Yeah, a bit of a lead change here from Gabriel is the Zacian and the Kyogre, so a double restricted lead, a ton of pressure. However, they are not going to love seeing the Tapu Koko on the other side of the field here. Getting that electric terrain up, and also pairing with this Palkia, which maybe means that you leave that Amoonguss behind if you're bringing your Tapu Koko.
Yeah, maybe. I remember back in the day when Tapu Koko was considered fast, and now it's just a little bit sad, isn't it, that the Zacian's sitting there in front of it, just faster. And unfortunately, usually the case is that the Zacian can knock out Tapu Koko in one, because while it's electric type, it's also part fairy, which means it's not going to resist that Behemoth Blade steel type move that Zacian is so well known for. And so, you've got this situation where you've got Zacian trying to knock out the Tapu Koko, trying to knock out the Kyogre, but the Kyogre wants the... and then the Palkia is trying to knock out the Zacian, potentially in this turn as well. So you've got this real, cycle of Pokemon going on, lots of offensive pressure on the board, and even more with that Palkia going for the Dynamax.
Yeah, kind of the opposite of a love triangle for Pokemon, it sounds like. Palkia, again, like you said, did go for the Dynamax this turn. We'll be able to use a powerful Max Geyser thanks to the rain. Ooh. However, Electroweb shows that this Tapu Koko is faster than the Zacian and will be slowing down both of the Pokemon on Gabriel's side of the field. So the the Tapu Koko could be showing maybe if it's carrying something like a Choice Scarf here. Max Geyser from the Palkia now moves ahead of both of these Pokemon. Into the Zacian is enough for the knockout, thanks to that rain. So really, now you don't even have to worry about the biggest threat to your Tapu Koko on your side of the field, because that Zacian is off the field. Kyogre going for an Origin Pulse, showing that felt like a better move choice over the Water Spout. Did connect onto both of the Pokemon and did do over 50% to that Tapu Koko.
Yeah, just excellent turn there from Lazaros, just showing what he's done to train these Pokemon, and that Tapu Koko really coming in clutch. Definitely holding a Choice Scarf. Actually, it could be that the Zacian on Gabriel's side of the field is one of the ones that's trained to be a little bit slower. If Gabriel has trained his Zacian to favor being more offensively capable, or maybe a little bit bulkier, in fact, and being able to take hits, the only place to really take that out of is speed. And the difference between Tapu Koko and Zacian isn't large enough where Tapu Koko can't outspeed the Zacian. We have confirmation on our screen there, a little bit of a window into the behind the scenes that is exactly what's going on here. So Tapu Koko can change its moves here, can just go for another Electroweb, of course, and put a lot of pressure on. If that Palkia is also carrying a fire move, then we're in for a really quick match, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you did reveal behind the screens that it is a Salt Vest instead. So now this Tapu Koko can handle some of these moves a little bit better from this Kyogre. Maybe not so much from the Kartana if it does take something like a Smart Strike, which it's not going to love doing, especially because that Kartana has not taken an Electroweb. to boot, but it is going to possibly take one this turn. Kyogre going for a protect here, trying to once again not take as much damage. Tapu Koko goes for a Volt Switch, though, targets into that Kartana smartly enough to just get a little bit of damage out and then not take something like a Smart Strike in retaliation. Going to be able to bring in another Pokemon that may be able to take the damage slightly better, or just maybe in a better board state to move forward, because it really seems like Lazaros is not going for Trick Room here, knowing that he's in a better position without it. Especially now that you have that opportunity for Electro Web. Amoonguss does come in, though, takes a Leaf Blade, which is fine for Amoonguss. It is not upset, even with a critical hit amount of damage here. Max Geyser from the Palkia going to be targeting down into the Pokemon on Gabriel's side, into that Kartana as well. So the Pokemon that did not protect gets another KO here onto that Kartana. This Palkia is a terror.
Yeah, that is just an excellent couple of turns for Lazaros. Gabriel making a couple of switch-ups here, but it looks like the Mimikyu, which is coming onto the field right now, was the Pokemon that Gabriel needed to start with, because right now, Palkia has just been able to freely attack into Gabriel's side of the field, but as it stands, Lazaros has used 2 of their turns of max. Gabriel's only not yet maxed, and we saw the effect of that Mimikyu going for its max in the previous game. No Intimidate so far coming onto the field, and potentially not an Intimidate in the back for Lazaros. So, the Mimikyu could go a little bit crazy here and do quite a lot of work, but it does seem like an uphill battle here for Gabriel.
It absolutely does seem like an uphill battle, and especially because you're using a max Starfall instead of that Play Rough. You may not get the I believe the special attack drop that could be super important to have as well. That low chance from Play Rough, I could be completely mistaken. Amoonguss, though, goes for that Rage Powder, trying to protect its partner Pokemon Palkia from anything like a max Starfall here. Mimikyu instead goes for that max Phantasm into the Amoonguss slot, not getting baited by that max, not being baited by that Rage Powder, and dropping the defense of both of these Pokemon on the field. Not really going to be as important now, as the Kartana and the Zacian have both been removed from the field, and you're facing more, really the only physical attack you may be facing is from this Mimikyu instead. Palkia going for that max Wormwind into the Kyogre here. Kyogre does not get knocked out here, hangs on with just a few HP left, but it is going to be getting the attack drop as well on the Mimikyu. So trying to help mitigate that defense drop with the attack drop on its own side. Kyogre goes for the Ice Beam into this Amoonguss, thanks to that Rage Powder. Is not able to handle that Ice Beam. Does get knocked out here, but that still means that this Palkia has a couple of really strong partner Pokemon in the back.
Yeah, and that Max Phantasm's only going to be helping the Mimikyu here, but that's going to do quite a bit of work. Disguise is still in play. We haven't seen any speed control so far on this Mimikyu, although the Tapu Koko coming in for Lazaros is going to probably change that and just make sure that the Mimikyu is going second. I would be surprised if a combination of Electro Web breaking the Disguise and a Hydro Pump, even in the rain, would be enough to knock out this Mimikyu from here, but we'll have to see how it goes. The trouble is that, especially after the Electro Web, Palkia's got a lot of work to do to knock out that Mimikyu, and Mimikyu's going to be fairly free to go for attacks into that Palkia, especially outside of its max.
Yeah, and there definitely are not many turns of rain left either, especially because the Kyogre was part of that lead. Mimikyu's Disguise does break here due to the Electro Web and takes that little tiny bit of damage. Palkia going for the Hydro Pump into the Mimikyu. Like you said, it is not enough to pick up the knockout, but it brings it so close. Max Starfall from this Mimikyu here into the Palkia. No longer having to worry about something like that Rage Powder is enough to pick the knockup here. However, that Electro may be trying to pay some dividends, because that last Pokemon in the back for Lazaros that we saw, a little peek behind the screen, is that Calyrex Ice Rider. So that Calyrex Ice Rider may be the slowest thing on the field. Mimikyu not getting knocked out due to its Life Orb here, but very close.
Yeah, and really, I think the only opportunity that Gabriel has, since there's no Incineroar from Lazaros' side of the field, is maybe if that Mimikyu is carrying Shadow Sneak. Maybe there's a little bit of an end game where you can go for a cheeky little Shadow Sneak, knock out the Tapu Koko. You may need a critical hit for that to be effective, but it might be a line that works. If that's the case, and maybe there's double protecting Kyogre. It could be that Gabriel has an opportunity to get back into this game, but Mimikyu holding that Life Orb is only going to get one more attack regardless of the situation here, unless it gets attacked, of course, before it's managed to get its own attack off. And so, Kyogre's got to, on its own, knock out that Calyrex and potentially knock out the Tapu Koko as well, and that's really quite a difficult ask.
Mimikyu goes for that max guard here, not going to want to take any damage, while the Wild Charge from the Tapu Koko into that Kyogre is enough to take out just that last little bit of HP. Tapu Koko takes a tiny amount in retaliation. However, Trick Room from this Calyrex, a really nice move from Lazaros just to kind of put himself in that great endgame position, knowing that he has a guaranteed attack from his Calyrex into this Mimikyu, and Mimikyu should be wrapping up its Dynamax right now as well. So Mimikyu, like you said, if it has something like that Shadow Sneak, that may be a way out, but you can only target one Pokemon at a time, and both of the Pokemon on Lazaros' side are looking really formidable right now.
They are indeed, and even if they manage to attack because that Life Orb is still there, Gabriel, reading into the situation, doesn't want to reveal anything. I think that's quite clever. In this scenario, you don't want to reveal any information in these games that you don't have to. And so forfeits the game 2 to Lazaros, and we get to have a game 3, and what a way to do it.
Yeah, and I really loved the changes that Lazaros made, right? His change, even from turn 1, he put on so much more offensive pressure instead of worrying maybe about trying to get into a different board state. I think just letting that Palkia just go for big attacks and getting rid of that Zacian right out of the gate to allow your Calyrex to be free, to allow your Tapu Koko to be free to move around far more comfortably, was incredibly smart by him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, until you know how these Pokemon are trained, it's really hard to make your moves. But, it's something we could have seen from where the Electric Surge activated and then the Intrepid Sword activated. We must have missed that in turn 1. And maybe Gabriel was thinking that there wouldn't be Electro Web, or maybe they just didn't catch the speed interactions there. And Lazaros was really able to capitalize on that. I think the thing that was most impressive was that Kartana going down straight away as well to the Max Geyser turn 2. And with both Kartana and Zacian, they were the 2 Pokemon that Gabriel had in the end game in game 1 that won the game. And so, turn 2, they're already knocked out. It was a really, really great adjustment for Lazaros. We'll have to see how both of these players adjust for game 3, because I don't know how to call it now.
Yeah, I don't think Gabriel's going to let that happen again. I think he's going to be far more mindful, but it is now something that you have to worry about when you're making your notes on, oh, hey, I cannot take a small move plus a Max Geyser. However, Amoonguss is going to be a lead change here for Lazaros paired up with that Palkia. Still the same 2 restricted pair from Gabriel of that Zacian and Kyogre to start out with a lot of offensive pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And this sort of redirection strategy coming out from Palkia and the Amoonguss, trying to be able to get up the Trick Room, it's just yet another strategy in Lazaros's arsenal. As far as this matchup goes, though, what we're seeing is effectively the bookwork. This is what's meant to happen, I think, in this matchup. The 2 restricteds versus Amoonguss Palkia. We see the Rage Powder, probably see the Trick Room coming out from the Palkia, and the Zacian and the Kyogre just try to punish that redirection, punish all of that with as much damage as they can, with the Behemoth Blade coming out from the Zacian and likely a Water Spout coming out from the Kyogre.
Yeah, that Citrus Berry bringing that Amoonguss almost back up to half of its HP, but this Water Spout able to bring it down, not enough to get knocked out, brings it incredibly close. So it is going to be able to possibly go for something like a Rage Powder in that next turn, or even because it's the slowest thing on the field, could go for something like a Spore on the next turn, which is going to be really important to maybe put something to sleep that you do not want to deal with right now.
No, exactly. And, it's now the choice as to which Pokemon Lazaros wants to target, right? Because that Amoonguss has free reign. You have got a Kartana in the back to worry about, so it really does matter which Pokemon, protects, which Pokemon switches out into the Kartana as to where that Amoonguss wants to target. But the problem is, if you're Gabriel, is that Zacian gets knocked out in 1 by a Max Geyser, so you've got to be really careful with how you play this turn.
Yeah, possibly you could even imagine something like a switch out into a Mimikyu here, but no switching. Zacian going for a Protect here. Not going to want to get knocked out as early as it did in that last round. Amoonguss goes for the Spore, though, into the Kyogre slot, so great choice of targeting by Lazaros. Getting that Kyogre to sleep to possibly mitigate more damage in the rain and get some damage off in return so that you can reduce the power of its Water Spout, but instead, this Max Geyser into the Zacian through Protect does about 25% of the HP there and a little bit more of chip on yourself from that Palkia. Kyogre taking its first turn of sleep here.
And, you know, that's good damage onto Zacian. That may be impactful in the later game. Certainly mean that an Earth Power, if the Palkia doesn't get to attack it within its max turns, it may be enough to pick out the knockout later down the line with that Life Orb power. But yeah, now it's like, well, does the Kartana come in here? Do we see a switch for the Zacian? Because if you let that Zacian, you know, get targeted down and knocked out, this Calyrex that's coming in for Lazaros is going to have a great time.
Yeah, and you're allowing that Amoonguss to go for that Regenerator ability that it has too, so to get some more HP back up. Zacian switches for the Kartana here as well. Max Geyser from this Palkia is going to still do a ton of damage. We saw this in that last game into this Kartana slot, that it was enough to get the knockout, and it is not this time actually. It brings it down so low. So maybe that little bit of chip damage that it had in that last game wasn't really what was huge. An early wake up from Kyogre, allowing it to get another Water Spout off with a ton of damage as it is still at full HP as well. But now you're facing down a Calyrex who is really looking forward to getting a Chilling Neigh boost.
It really is, and you've got to decide on where to target, because that Calyrex took so much damage from the Water Spout and the switch-in. It's a really nice move for Lazaros, trying to play as positively as possible, thinking, do you know what, that Calyrex looks like it needs a bit of a longer nap, and I'm just going to try to position my Calyrex in. You know that you're going to get a lot of damage into the Zacian slot. If that switches to Kartana, well, you know it's going to take a lot of damage as well. If it switches to Mimikyu, the Mimikyu's going to get its Disguise broken, which could be impactful. So nice play there, but Gabriel getting a little bit on his side and getting the Kyogre to wake up.
Yeah, and Kyogre waking up here allows it waking up in that last turn allows it to go for a Protect, not taking this damage from this Glacial Lance. However, this will be going into that Kartana and getting that knockout, which means now you're at a +1 attack with your Chilling Neigh boost, which may be tougher to take with that Kyogre on the next turn. So this Kyogre, even though protected, maybe in a little bit of a tougher spot. Max Quake from the Palkia going into this protected Kyogre won't do a ton of damage thanks to that Protect. It really doesn't do much at all. But any damage is damage onto a Kyogre, especially when that's the Pokemon that your team kind of struggles to deal with the most without maybe that Tapu Koko in the back to go for something like that Wild Charge, where so much of your damage kind of came off of just consistent smaller attacks in that last game.
Yeah, exactly. And now the Mimikyu's coming out, maybe there's enough there for the Mimikyu to knock out that Calyrex again if it's got the access to Shadow Sneak. We could also see either of these Pokemon really go for their Dynamax factor in this game. If Gabriel is thinking that maybe there isn't a Tapu Koko in the back in this game, since Lazaros went for the Trick Room strategy rather than just trying to go offensive like he did in game 2, maybe could max the Kyogre here. And Kyogre is one of those Pokemon that's so bulky, and Calyrex and Palkia between them don't have too many ways to shut it down. Could be a really nice option for Gabriel to just sit in front of Lazaros with a big Pokemon just doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, and Shadow Sneak is hidden onto that Mimikyu. Really nice reveal in this game 3. Able to get the knockout right away onto this Calyrex that got that important boost in the last game. Palkia goes for the Hydro Pump, but it avoids the Mimikyu. Kyogre going for the Ice Beam into that Palkia slot. Now that its partner Pokemon of Calyrex has been knocked out, Rain ends here as well. So those Hydro Pumps are not going to be able to do as much damage. But most importantly, 1, Trick Room is over, and 2, this Mimikyu still has its Disguise.
Yeah, that Disguise is going to be really impactful in this end game, because you know we've got the Amoonguss in the back, which is on pretty low health. You can keep cycling that round for Regenerator, but as we can see, there's Incineroar in the back for Lazaros. So whenever you want to switch the Amoonguss out, you have to switch the Incineroar in, and you're probably going to be switching that into potentially going to be switching that into a water type move, ice type move, but you could be switching it into a water type move, and that's causes problems of its own. I think the real big threat here is for Gabriel is the Amoonguss, but of course there is the option for the Mimikyu to just go on the offensive, go for its max form, go for a max Starfall. That'll reduce the damage that Palkia is able to dish out, but also put a lot of pressure onto Lazaros' side of the field.
Yeah, and it definitely also prevents that Spore, if that was maybe a choice for Lazaros to kind of figure out his end game a little bit here, especially since Gabriel still has the ability to change the weather, allow it to start raining again, either with a Max Geyser possibly, or just the opportunity to switch out and switch back in for that last Pokemon that he's carrying, which is that Kartana on very low HP. So even getting that knockout is not too bad because you're allowing yourself to change the weather. However, there is still a Dynamax on Gabriel's side of the field. There were no switches, and it is going to be the Dynamax Mimikyu like we've seen in the past 2 games, which sometimes feels like a little bit of a funkier choice, but you can see how well it's been working for Gabriel to have access to that Max Starfall, to do that super effective damage into the Palkia, because we haven't seen anything like a Play Rough on the Zacian, so that Zacian wasn't able to do that kind of damage that it was hoping for. Amoonguss goes for the Rage Powder to take this Max Phantasm damage from this Mimikyu and get that away from its partner Pokemon Palkia. However, it is knocked out this turn, so now the Palkia on this side of the field, if it went for something like that Trick Room in this turn, it is not going to be able to do a ton of damage. Kyogre going for an Ice Beam here does take this at full force, but it still brings it down to Palkia to the bottom 25% of its HP. Trick Room comes up here, so this Palkia is in a better position, but again, this Mimikyu's disguise is still not broken, and you are bringing in an Incineroar to deal with the disguise of that Mimikyu and to deal with this Kyogre.
Yeah, and you can see the effect of the Max Quake earlier in the game. That Palkia able to survive, and 26 HP that we can see is quite impactful because it means that Palkia can attack 3 more times if it's not attacked before, which will be, you definitely need to start attacking things as much as possible. But now that Misty Terrain is up, Spatial Rend isn't going to be doing too much damage to the Kyogre. Of course, Incineroar not known for doing too much damage to Kyogres on Gabriel's side of the field in the first place. And with that defense drop as well, even if the Palkia could go for a Protect, you'd still expect the Mimikyu to be knocking it out through the Protect as well.
Yeah, Mimikyu finally takes an attack here from that Throat Chop of the Incineroar, busting that disguise, taking that tiny little bit of chip damage. Palkia going for the Hydro Pump into the Mimikyu. Without that rain, you can see how important that was. That Mimikyu does not get brought down to that bottom 25%. Water Spout from this Kyogre, basically at full HP, brings the Incineroar down to its Focus Sash that we saw in that last game, but it does knock out Palkia here, who was at only 8 HP after using its Life Orb. So this Incineroar, I think, is not in a spot that it is going to be able to finish off this game by taking this Max Phantasm, which is showing for Gabriel, I think, how important it was to, even though Trick Room, I believe, was a little bit more of a priority for Lazarus, not bringing that Tapu Koko felt like a little bit of a different, it felt like he should have brought that Tapu Koko to that last game, because it did put on so much pressure. And it, instead of prioritizing the Trick Room, I think the prioritization of the Tapu Koko and just getting Electro Webs down was really what was so helpful, because that little bit of chip damage was enough to knock out that Zacian with the Max Geyser from the Palkia.
Yeah, and we saw how fast that Palkia was in game 2, where so the Zacian on Gabriel's side of the field was on the slower side, as it turned out, but actually, after the Electro Web, the Palkia was fast enough to outspeed it and go for that Max Geyser, which means the Palkia wasn't particularly slow. At least it had a little bit of an investment likely in its speed. And, those sort of Electro Webs would have been a little bit more positive speed control, because, Zacian almost certainly the fastest Pokemon, should I say, on Gabriel's side of the field. So if Electro Webs works on Zacian, it works on every single Pokemon. And so, not being able to do that was a little bit concerning. But, I think Gabriel would have made their adjustments to be able to deal with that that Electro Web in game 2 a little bit better, maybe played a little bit more defensively. So, whether it would have resulted in a game win for Lazaros. Who knows? As it stands, Lazaros did not take the Tapu Koko, and unfortunately, it was not enough to take a win for Greece. So it will be Brazil that's taking another win and going 3-2 up in the match between Greece and Brazil.
Yeah, which is an incredibly important win there, right? Because now it is no longer tied. Now Brazil has that advantage to possibly move a little bit farther forward. Either, only one win closer to securing a tie, two wins closer to securing the win on the week. So, when you have 3 matches left, those are pretty good odds, right? To at least have a really successful weekend to wrap up this week too. But to wrap up this week too for us, Ben, we have a very exciting final match as well between Eduardo Cunha and Kentaro Matsumoto. So between Portugal and Japan. And seeing Japan getting knocked out in top 16 last year was really interesting, being knocked out by France. However, they've been providing us with some really interesting games, especially, that game with Paul Ruiz and with Shoma last week was really interesting. Yeah. So I'm hoping we can have as good of a time as we did last week with our final game this week.
It should be great. But in the meantime, we are going to go to a short break. We'll get the next match ready to go. So stay tuned. We will be back in a few moments.